Hey everyone, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks, and boy, have I got a treat for you today, and that's because you're not going to get one, not two, not three, but 4 helpings of gameplay of Soviet medium tanks. Now, every single one of these games that you're going to be seeing today was from my Tech Tree Showcase yesterday, live on Twitch. And these all happened within an hour of one another, and so you're going to have to hang around. Are we going to win? Are we going to lose? I guess that remains to be seen. Hopefully I'm not going to spoil it for all of you who didn't tune in yesterday. But I will say that I really want to see if this video is something that you enjoy, whether the idea of playing Tier 5, 6, 7 and 8 in a row gives you all an idea of the Soviet tech tree, and we can do a bit of a post-game analysis as well as to moments where these tanks were able to pull through and carry the game, or alternatively, just how they stack up compared to some of their components. So firstly, let's talk about this iconic tank. This is the T-34. It was the most widely produced Soviet vehicle in World War II. It was really one of the mainstays of the Soviet forces as to how they were to hold back the German advance. Now, the T-34 inside World of Tanks is a vehicle that I would thoroughly recommend that you always keep. Unless, of course, you have no interest in playing Tier 5, because it's an absolute powerhouse at Tier 5. A lot of people will get this tank and they'll make a huge mistake by using the 76mm main armament on it. That is the wrong gun to take. There's no ifs, there's no buts. The better gun to take on this tank, unless you're an absolute utter free-to-play player and you have no interest in ever dabbing that 2 key, is the 57mm. And even with standard rounds, this 57mm is just absolutely relentless, boys and girls. It has 2,200 damage per minute. That's just absolutely crazy. That's the kind of damage per minute that you start to get up towards Tier 8. It's a decent damage per minute for Tier 8. It's an okay damage per minute for Tier 9. And there are many Tier 10 tanks that have sub 2,200 damage per minute and can still be very efficient. So to be able to have this at Tier 5 and literally be able to just rip chunks off your opponent's hit points with very little delay in between the shots. In fact, the only thing that really holds this gun back is the aim time on it. It's got a 2.3 second aim time on this gun, and the dispersion values when you move the turret are not very good. And also the dispersion values after firing are rather large as well. But when you get this thing short at mid-ranges, or even if you just manage to harness the rate of fire of the gun and you get used to firing when your reticle has finished fully aiming, then this thing can be absolutely devastating. I would put this tank on par with quality to a tank like the Panzer IV or the M4. Sherman, both iconic tanks inside the game. But those two tanks I feel do far better if you're going to use the 105mm derp on them. This tank doesn't rely on high explosive rounds. It doesn't rely on you loading the gold and firing heat to be able to gain penetration to be able to make those derps work. What this tank excels at is just being absolutely ruthless with decent penetration on its standard rounds, no need to penetrate with high explosive rounds, and just absolutely doing everything. Its armor is 45mm at the front, part of the side is 40 and part of the side is 45, which allows you to side scrape against all but the largest of caliber guns, usually on tanks that are 2 tiers higher than you. And when you combine all of this together, just the huge damage per minute upgrade from this tank, that if you've gone through the light tanks and you've just played the T80 before you pick up this one, this just feels like an absolute cracking tank. To round it all off, 8 degrees of gun depression on it, and a bit of a hit point upgrade to 450, and this is definitely one of the more dominant tanks at Tier 5. Alright, so I saw the enemies were advancing along the west here, and so I fell back to be able to line up an ambush, because I have to try and stop my opponents from entering the cap circle. And one of the most important things for you to do at low tiers, and I would consider Tier 5 to be a low tier, is to just try and boost up your view range as much as you possibly can. I will use binoculars up until I have a decent crew and a base view range on the tank of at least 370, more likely 380 meters view range. Before that, I will always use binos, and that will allow even a mediocre crew to be able to get up to about 470 meters view range. And that is enough to be able to outspot your opponents at long range, and it will allow you to pick them apart without them even seeing you. Now I'd like to highlight that I'm actually firing premium rounds here because this game was so close, and each one of these shots missing might be the difference between me taking down my opponents and not. But if you were even to use the standard rounds on this tank, that they have 112mm of pen, there'd probably be enough to go through the KV-1 turret some of the time, but not all of the time. And when you're being pressured by multiple tanks on the cap circle, the difference between penetrating and not is usually the difference between winning the game or not. So I'm going to use the standard rounds here to break down the building, and now I'm going to load premium rounds again to be able to go through the side of the KV-1 turret, and one more should be able to finish him off, but of course we get a bit of bad luck. Come on, this time please. Thank you. 83 damage into the side of the tier 5 Soviet heavy tanks turret, and 1,700 damage from this sneaky sniper location. That has put us in a great position. If you're wondering how the KV-1 didn't spot us there, that's because he has got about 330 meters base view range. And when you combine that with the camera rating that this vehicle has, even with when it's stationary with a decent crew, and he's just not going to be able to spot us at that range. And so we're able to pick him apart. We're hiding in the bushes as well, or those would have been broken by when we were firing inside this tank. And now it's just a case of just doing the dirty work, boys and girls. We interrupt the T-28, we get 86 base defense points. We did that cleanly without them even managing to see us. And then wham bam, suddenly the T-34 has totally changed this game around. Picked up 3 kills while defending the cap circle, and all that's left is for my team to be able to finish off the 2 remaining tanks and be able to cap out. So before we move on to the T-34-85, this was an ace tanker for the T-34, a defender medal, and a high caliber for the 1,837 damage that we dealt, although I did spend a lot of credits on premium ammunition, but this game was too close for comfort, and as I said, I think that one shell could have made all of the difference. So now we're moving on to the T-34-85, and as the name would suggest, this is pretty much a T-34 with an 85mm gun. So we've jumped up from a 57mm, we're skipping the uncompetitive 76mm on the tank, and we're going straight towards an 85mm. Now, when you use a bigger gun, as you would expect, it does hit harder. The T-34-85 with 180 alpha damage on its standard rounds and 300 alpha damage on its high explosive rounds. This is one of the most underrated things about a high explosive round on an 85mm gun, is that they're just absolutely outrageous. And if you do get to engage lightly armored tanks, they can be truly devastating and kill multiple artillery every few seconds. However, to be able to use this larger gun inside this tank, you do have to make a few sacrifices. And with the T-34-85, that is the damage per minute. The damage per minute has gone from 2,200 to 1,800. It's absolutely horrific when we think about that. But then again, to have that big step up in alpha damage to 180, it's arguable about whether you would want to make it. Also, the standard penetration on this tank is much better compared to the 57mm main armament. It's now up to 144. That is decent for tier 6, and when you're in a matchup like this, you can make do for the most part with just regular rounds. There are only a few tanks on the enemy team that I'm going to be able to struggle to penetrate with my regular rounds. That's probably the VK3601. Now this T-52 is giving us an absolute nightmare on top of the hill, and I must say a big shout out to Egeen in the T-52 on my team for going and shutting down that player who just wanted to sit out in the open and just be able to engage us. We get hit by a premium round from an M10 RBFM on the enemy team, and you can quickly see that even 720 hit points at tier 6 doesn't go a long way with the alpha damages of mid-tiers. And while I strongly dislike the high explosive changes that Wargaming put on the sandbox test server, I will go in ahead and admit that I really like the health point changes that they made to a variety of vehicles. To give all of the low tier tanks increased hit points is what I recommended to do in my how I would fix World of Tanks video towards the end of 2018. It definitely makes sense. Tanks just die too quickly at low tier, and it doesn't give the new players an opportunity to really be able to get into the game, to be able to learn how the game mechanics actually work out. So a Stuk 4 plays very aggressively, comes around the corner, catches me completely by surprise because I really didn't expect a player to do that. I thought that maybe my tanks that were over here would be able to engage them, but that wasn't the case. The Stuk puts another round into the front of my tank, and I'm just too busy trying to get rid of this M5A1 Stuart because I want to get rid of the eyes of the enemy team right up towards the front. And then if I can get rid of their vision, then hopefully that will keep my back line a lot safer. Anyway, it looks like it's the Hummel actually on my team who finishes off the M5A1, and that allows me to turn my attention instead towards the mid-ridge. But absolute disaster. A T-40 spots me out in the open. I decide to fire a shot on the move, and can you believe it? Because I was aiming inside my sniper mode, I actually ram into the only object that there is on this entire slope are dead looks. Well, it's kind of like a 50-50 there. Should you look where you're going, or should you just drive where you think you want to go while also manually aiming at the tank that you want to engage that's shooting at you? Oh well, can you believe it? Like, to not have that. Look at how few things there were in this whole big path. And of course, sod's law that I drive straight into the looks, right? Talking about looks, there seems to be an epic duel here of the looks tanks. Wow, the enemy looks finishes off our looks, and I'm going to be able to hopefully be able to finish off him when he comes around the corner. But once again, the Hummel on my team seems to want to shoot anything that I feel like I've got locked down between a rock and a hard place, right? But you know what? I'm not complaining, because this game, like the previous one, is neck and neck, and if the Hummel wants to help me out, then that's no biggie as far as I'm concerned. So this is why I use binoculars on my mid-tier medium tanks. The base view range on this tank is 360, and unless you have an incredible crew, you are never going to be able to get up to about 450 meters view range to be able to reach that magical 445 meters spotting distance cap. But of course, you need to get higher than 445 meters view range to be able to achieve that. More like about 490 meters view range would be optimal with the amount of camera rating that these mid-tier medium tanks and some of the heavy tanks have to be able to spot them at 445. But look how great that was. We caught the Hetzer out in the open. If we hadn't, then that Hetzer might have been able to make it towards our artillery and really be able to punish my team. In the end, we spotted him out, we shut him down very quickly indeed, and what was the Hetzer to do really? We two-shot the poor tank, and that's pretty much what happens in World of Tanks at these mid-tiers. But an absolute bizarre moment here, I get spotted! I freak out, I can't believe that VK3601 spots me. He is clearly using binoculars over there. Alright, so we know that the tier 6 German heavy tank, who just shut down heavy tank number 6 on our team, looks like a bit of a stationary player with regards to binoculars, but I can't talk considering I'm using them. However, I also get hit by the previous M10 RBFM that shot me earlier, this time loading standard rounds, and he hit me from there, and I ping the map, and do I actually communicate that to my team? I don't. I just ping the map as to where the tank was, but I didn't actually say that he was there. Alright, pressure situation. I've got 180 alpha damage. Will I be able to two-shot this tank? I will do 50% of the time. Please don't low roll, thank goodness! We shut him down, and just in time, as it looks like one of the artillery narrowly misses our vehicle, and with 6 remaining hit points, oh, I definitely got lucky there. To all intents and purposes, I could have died to the RBFM if he'd managed to put a round into me. Even if he'd rolled a little bit higher with his shot, would have been able to finish me off. But even at just the lightest of artillery splashes would have been able to shut me down in this scenario. Alright, so how am I going to finish off this game? The VK3601, as we've clearly shown, has got binoculars on his tank, so he's got very good view range. I don't have the best camera rating in this vehicle, and if I'm probably about 430 meters away from him and I fire, he's definitely going to spot me. So I've got to take that into consideration. I've got to try and stay at the boundaries of the VK, and if I fire when I get anywhere near him, then that's going to be of grave concern. So I've nearly fired all of my standard rounds in this tank, so I'm loading my premium rounds now, because that is a tier 6 German heavy tank. And again, when you're on 6 hit points, it's all about if you bounce a single shot can be the difference between you winning the game or not. If you bounce one and you have to sit there for an additional 3-4 seconds to be able to load another shell into the tank, that could be the time that it takes for the artillery to hit you instead of actually being able to you evade their shell and for you to go on to vanquish them at the end of the battle. So there's a T-52 on my team who is progressing very aggressively towards the enemy base. I'm more focused on the VK though, and I want to get a decent distance away from the VK to be able to engage them. We actually spot the AMX out for the T-52. We missed the first shot, an absolute disaster there. We'll be able to finish it up with a second one. We do. We shut down the tier 6 French tank destroyer. And talking about tier 5 French tank destroyers, here's the Leffe, boys and girls. Boom! Premium tank down! I probably didn't need to fire all of those gold rounds into the vehicle, but I don't know about you guys, I absolutely hate the Leffe. Probably one of my most hated tanks to play against because it's just so darn overpowered and just frankly ruins games. Every time Wargaming sells that tank, while they benefit financially, they literally make their game worse, and they probably alienate players from wanting to play it. Anyway, let's focus up on the matter at hand, and that is that there's now 1 kill between me and getting a top gun. Now, we remember where the VK was. It was situated right here. So again, we don't spot him. Bang! Binoculars up, we do spot him, and he hasn't moved. Now, this is an interesting moment, right? Remember, when we fired at this guy earlier, we got spotted. He's clearly got good view range. The way that he's turning his turret, it seems like a bot. But either this is a really good bot, or maybe I'm just getting too old for this, boys and girls. This bot, or this player, has managed to get 2 kills. So the last thing that I want to do right now is to fire. It was hilarious while I was playing this game live yesterday. Yeah, just once again, all of the games you're going to be seeing in the YouTube video were in a row, pretty much. Up until the last one, but I'll explain that later. But if I fire right now, what's going to happen is that the VK is going to spot me. And then maybe he just starts to fire at me randomly. Maybe the VK will get really lucky and finish me off. Now, I can obviously fire now while his turret is away from me. But what I really want to happen is I want him to move. Because if the VK moves, even just an inch, he will deactivate his binoculars. I know this guy's not using coated optics. There's no way he would have spotted me earlier if he was using coated optics, unless they had the best of crews. I was pretty much certain at this point that the player was using binoculars, and so if I can just wait for them to move like that, now I can shoot them, and they won't spot me anymore. You can see that the player is looking roughly in my direction, but it looks like they don't have an all-round knowledge of the way that the reticle works and being able to match it up to know the direction that your opponents are. And so what that allows me to do is to fire in between his micro movements when his binoculars will be deactivated, and we can finish him off safely without any kind of risk here. And that's really what you've got to do in these kind of situations. Sure, I guess if I wasn't taking the game so seriously, I could have just fired and I probably would have got away with it. But maybe that one time out of 100, the bot could have just instantly snapshotted us, and would my team have been able to finish them off at the end of the game? I don't think so. Why take the risk? Why not just use your knowledge of game mechanics to know that if he moves, his binoculars deactivates, never be able to spot us, we can finish them off. So another ace tanker for us here, Pascucci's medal for taking out 2 artillery, a high caliber medal for the 2,600 damage that we dealt, and a top gun for our 6 kills. This time, we didn't fire nearly as many premium rounds, and we actually made 15,000 credits profit. Not bad. Now let's move on to the tier 7 Soviet medium tank, the T-43. So this tank is pretty much like the previous vehicle, apart from there are a couple of differences. Number one, while you use the same gun, it does have a much better rate of fire. Your damage per minute is now up to 2,000 again, and while that isn't quite as good as the damage per minute we had with the tier 5 tank 2 tiers ago, which had 2,200, it's starting to get up until the healthy margins where if you sit if you allow this tank to shoot you enough, if you're in a heavy tank and this is engaging you in the side, this is definitely probably one of your more key threats to try and deal with. Apart from that, the T-43, God, these names are getting a bit confusing, right? Back up to 8 degrees of gun depression, which allows you to be more flexible on a ridgeline. It has more hit points, and its armor is way better. It has 75mm at the front, although, let's be fair, that's never really going to work consistently against equal and higher tiered opponents unless you're angling very well, but the side armor is brilliant. 75mm allows you to side scrape very well and to be able to bait shots from your opponents. And when we combine this with 370 meters view range and 1,100 hit points, you now have the view range and the hit points to be able to outspot your opponents at long distances, but also more importantly, to out-duel them. The hit points start to increase rapidly from tier 5 up to tier 7, and it's no different for the T-43. Alright, so we managed to put some pressure against the E-75 on the enemy team, probably one of the most overpowered tanks you could possibly play at tier 7. I don't think anybody would really ever say the same for this tank, right? Nevertheless, that doesn't mean that we can't be successful by just doing the basics right. That's really what it comes down to. So now we're loading one of those high explosive rounds I talked about with the 85mm, and boom! We only do 167 damage. Well, at least that meant that there was no chance of low rolling, because that was actually a 300 damage penetration shell. So the Stritzwang M42-57 is caught out in the open. What I'm going to do is pull back behind the bush, and I'm going to shoot through these trees, or the bush that's in front of me. He won't be able to spot me. And that allows us to finish him off. Remember, you go into the bush until the bush is transparent, allowing you to see through the bush, and then you pull back behind the bush when the bush or the tree is now opaque, and they won't be able to see you when you fire through the bush. Again, use of game mechanics. It's not all about crew skills. I only have probably about 50% repairs on all of my crew members here. I am using a 6th sense directive during my tech tree showcases, however, because I really want to try and make these tanks shine and be special, as I only get to play them once as I work my way up the tech tree. So I was pretty chuffed right now that I managed to get an ace in the tier 5 and the tier 6, and we were kind of going for a hat trick in this game, a hat trick of aces, so I was pretty fired up. Alright, so we outspot this E25. I pull back behind the bush. I shoot through and God knows how this guy didn't get killed there. That shell should have been able to hit them every single time pretty much. And now I have to deal with a T-52 to my right. I have to deal with a Leo to the left. And somehow that shell misses as well. Well, look, I'm not the kind of guy who puts on a tinfoil hat in the evenings, but come on. Why is possibly one of the most pay-to-win garbage tanks there getting kind of some kind of RNG protection against this T-43? Just didn't feel right at the time. Nevertheless, he's dead. I'm still alive. We outspot the Leo with 666 spotting there against him. And now we get to turn our attention to the vehicles towards the middle. And we just really did the basics right. We got into a position, we extended our view range. And that's what I really feel like you have to do in your mid-tier medium tanks. If you can do that, you can be incredibly influential in your games. And then, apart from that, it's all about just being a cool guy and not looking at fires as the T-52 burns to death to the left. And instead, turning attention to the Hellcat to be able to maximize our damage output right now. And we're actually spotting that Hellcat as well for our allies with our binoculars. Again, because remember, as I said, I will use binoculars up until I can get about maybe 440 meters view range with coated optics, and this tank with 370 meters base view range, unless you have an exceptionally skilled crew with brothers in arms, situational awareness and recon on your commander, you just can't get the view range good enough with 370 base view range. And so I'll always use binoculars on these tanks as a way to kind of like cheap out and still be able to have that 490 meters view range, but it's only going to be when I'm stationary. But I can still work with that. I can work with my view range only being usable when it's stationary, but I can't work with not having enough view range to be able to deal with my opponents when I need to. Alright, so Jagdpanzer IV on the enemy team. We're going to put one round into the top left-hand corner of the tank. We're going to pull back a little bit here in a second. Well, he is, sorry. And we're going to finish him off, putting our kill tally up to 5 in this game. But there's 3 tanks on the enemy team to still deal with, including 2 Tier 8 tank destroyers. And the ISU 152 was last spotted above the WZ. And oh my lord, they're coming right for us! Quickly, evasive maneuvers. Oh dear. We plow ourselves into the building to try and get away from these tanks. I'm just hoping that they didn't spot me, but maybe the ISU will. Will the ISU spot me in this scenario? Oh my lord, he does. Quickly, get behind a building. That thing's got 152mm main armament that can pretty much remove all of my remaining hit points in a single shot. So we don't want that to happen. And if the WZ 111 1FT is using the top gun, which I believe has 560 alpha damage on that tier 8 Chinese tank destroyer, yeah, he's going to be killing me in one shot as well. Higher tier tank destroyers caught out in the open. But look at this SP-1C. What an absolute boss, turning the tank around in the open for me, allowing me to be able to pummel the side of the higher tier TD. 1 round in, 2 rounds in, 3 rounds in. Can we make it 4? We managed to show. No, I don't know how that shell just missed there. Maybe the 5th is going to go in. It does, and the SP-1C finishes them off. And now we can turn our attention to the tier 8 Chinese TD. So I aimed a shot there for the tracks, doesn't manage to go in. Now I'm firing standard rounds, and I actually, in retrospect, this was a bit of a misplay. Why am I trying to just fire standard rounds here? Why am I being cheap? I should have just loaded the gold, and I probably would have been able to finish off the WZ there and then. Now up to 2,600 damage and 1,500 spotting and 5 kills in our tier 7 medium tank. I was feeling pretty chipper because I knew as long as I play carefully here and I don't get bum rushed by the WZ 111 1FT and I just wait for the AMD 178B to be able to spot them out, I should be good. Alright, so I'm using, do you see how I'm looking at the minimap right now and I'm lining up my reticle with the enemy tank to approach the bush? Because obviously if he stays in his last known location, I can use that to drive into the bush safely without them ever getting view range on me. And so, by sitting here, activating my binos, there they are, there's the WZ, one into the side of the Chinese tier 8. Are we going to put a second one in? Yes, we are. Will the AMD be able to finish them off? Doesn't look like it. Are we going to be able to pick up another Top Gun? Second in a row. Fantastic stuff for the T-43. And yeah, I was pretty happy about this, boys and girls. It's not every day that you get a hat trick in World of Tanks. And unfortunately, while there was no high caliber in this game, because the Oni on the enemy team had a cracking round with 4,000 damage dealt, we still get a Top Gun. And to be able to get 1,377 base experience is decent, and again, we didn't fire too many premium rounds here, so we made a profit with or without a premium account. And while the T43 is not really that much better than a T34-85 was at tier 6, as long as you use those hit points and the fairly decent armor that the vehicle has, and use some binoculars to amplify that 370 meters base view range, it can still do the basics enough. And this gun, as long as you aim carefully and you load the gold, occasionally when aiming carefully is not going to be enough, you can still have cracking rounds. Now, full disclosure, the game after this one, it wasn't 4 ace tankers in a row, boys and girls. I played a T44 on Himmelsdorf, and my team really just didn't play to win. And there's nothing that I could do because I was really trying to keep the momentum going. However, afterwards, I played the T44-100, and this is what happened. So this tank is as close as you can get to the standard T44, so I'm sorry that I'm finishing it off with a premium vehicle, but really, the only differences between this tank and that tank is that this one is just slightly better. But enough to make it questionable that this would be a tactic for a free-to-play game. But let me just highlight really what the differences are. Number one, this tank has spaced armor over the side, as you can see. Secondly, I think the tank has got slightly better ground resistances, maybe even just a touch better gun handling. But really, everything that you see me do in the T44-100, you can definitely do in the T44 as well. So with that in mind, let's get underway and talk about what you can do in the T44-100 when you reach this stage of the tech tree. So, the T44-100, when you manage to get this tank, or I'm just going to be calling it the T44, I guess, throughout this replay, it's a lot faster. You've got a big old grunty engine, and your top speed is now up to 52 kilometers an hour, with your reverse speed being 23 kilometers an hour, which is lovely. But for the first time in a few tiers, your alpha damage has actually increased up to 250 now, with 190 millimeters of standard pen and 247 on your premium pen. So now you can actually start to trade effectively. And while you're not going to be doing as much damage as the KB3 is, you're just going to be doing it oh so much more often. And with a rate of fire of 8 rounds a minute, that will allow you to start to really out-trade some of the heavy tanks. Do they miss you? Well, shoot them twice before they reload. Yeah, do they hit you? Well, at least you can manage to shoot them twice anyway. Maybe they do 390 to you. Hopefully you can return the favor by putting 2 rounds in and doing 500. You now got a good enough rate of fire and alpha damage to be able to lock down the tracks of your opponents and really go to town on them. So, also, your frontal armor on this tank is 190 millimeters on the turret and 90 millimeters on the hull, with 75 millimeters of side armor, and it's so much better angled than it was on the T43, as we can clearly see when I zoom out a little bit. And that means that you can pretty much just angle the tank like this and be able to ricochet a lot of rounds that you otherwise couldn't have in the previous tank. Also, you'll be noticing just how much better aim time this tank has. And that's because this is the first tank along the Soviet medium tank tech tree that can use vertical stabilizers as a piece of equipment. And you should definitely use vertical stabilizers. Now, I knew this guy wasn't going to repair. Why? Because I tracked him earlier. And sometimes a tank with a good repair crew would have been able to repair between the 2 shots of this tank, as it doesn't have the best rate of fire. However, it's a light tank, and I knew because it was a light tank that it's very likely that that player, instead of taking repairs, has taken concealment, as they should do. Now, when you're playing a medium tank like this, it's all about using your mobility. KV3 trundling down a slope to try and catch you? Nah, mate. How about we don't have that? I really don't want to start trading with you. You've got just as many hit points as me. In fact, you've got more hit points than me, and eventually you're going to be able to whittle me down. And I don't want to trade my hit points evenly with a Soviet heavy tank. A KV3. I want to try and trade them unevenly. I want to trade 1 shot into me for hopefully 3 shots into them. But it shows you that sometimes you can't have what you want in life, boys and girls. And the KV3 flanks me and puts a cracking shot into the side of my vehicle. Massive misplay there by me. I've taken 400, well, I've got 410 hit points left. That's an absolute disaster that I allowed that KV3 to shave those hit points off. But good play by him, bold play to catch me napping and ill-prepared. Alright, so now I'm going to try and take advantage of engaging this T49. We're going to lurch forwards. In fact, I'm actually going to ignore the T49. I'm going to shoot the Leopard prototype instead, as I thought that this T49 was actually going away from me, but he was actually looping in front of me. And in retrospect, that's an incredibly dangerous play, because if this T49 is using the derp, he'll be able to probably remove most of my hit points, and if he's not using the derp, well then he can shoot me twice with his 90mm gun. So unfortunately for me, as I was going up to make a play against the T49, the enemy artillery splashes us, albeit for only 3 damage. I think that a lot of that was probably down to the spaced armor protection that this vehicle has over the side. We actually get protected from that shell. Absolutely amazing stuff. And then the Leopard prototype gets caught out in the open once again. We've got a 50-50 to kill them there. Unfortunately, we low roll. But again, we're not hanging around and looking at what happens with the shells. We're thinking about what our next shell will do. And look what you can do with the vertical stabilizers on this tank, combined with decent dispersion values when turning the turret to 0.11 and when turning the tank of 0.12. And you can just keep firing on the move. This is really when the Soviet medium tanks become just that. That is, dynamic vehicles that want to just keep engaging, to keep moving, and to keep harassing their opponents, go everywhere, do everything, but like basically be the all-rounders of World of Tanks. And it just leaves heavy tanks and other slower medium tanks like the Super Pershing just frankly napping and looking like very awkward vehicles. Of course, unless you manage to get hull down against something like this. If a Super Pershing used a ridgeline with its 10 degrees of gun depression, or even if he just relied on his excellent spaced armor over the front of the tank and we got into an all-in frontal engagement, he'd probably be able to win it. Of course, I can aim through the 2 weak points which I highlighted in one of my videos last week, i.e. the gap where the machine gun port is, which doesn't have any spaced armor over, or when you're facing the tank at the top left cupola. But really, I have to aim at his weak points, and he can just aim through the front of my armor. It'd be a bit of a disaster for me. Right, do we get to finish off the Leopard prototype? Yes, we do. Picking up our 4th kill of the game, and it's starting to look really good. I love this position up here when you have the amount of gun depression this tank has. 7 degrees of gun depression on this tank. And that allows you to just be able to just work a ridge line. And this position is just oh so strong for catching a bird's eye view of your opponents. Now, a bit of a misplay there by me. I could have very easily died against the standard B. But in this kind of a scenario, I like to really let rip. I like to loosen my buttons a little bit, you know, undo the tie and just get stuck in. Because in these kind of scenarios, the game is already won. And so it's about trying to get as much as you can from the game as possible. And hopefully it'll be that. Oh, come on. No way. We don't get to kill the artillery that was splashing us earlier. Oh well, maybe we'll manage to get something else. How about the Su-152? Will we be able to get that tank? No, we won't get that tank either. Oh, disaster. Well, this isn't looking like it's going to end up being an incredible game for the T-44-100 like I was hoping it was going to be. Now, well, maybe we can do some stuff at the end of it. How about we finish off the standard B, and then we think, who's going to engage us next? Well, look, the tank on our right will think we're shooting the tank on the left, so let's shoot the tank on the right instead first. And now we've shot the tank on the right, now we can turn our attention to the slow, cumbersome heavy tank that's right in front of us. My artillery tracks me and stuns me, but he also tracks the Lerva. Not really too useful for me, but okay. And the artillery looks like they fire another shell into us. We get behind the Lerva, we outmaneuver this tank, we're making them look silly, and unfortunately, no Radley Walters medal for us. I was hoping for my 8th kill there, but still, we killed just less than half of the enemy team in this round. And again, a cracking result. And this was literally the game after I played the game in the T-44. So we got ace, 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 and then will this one be an ace as well? And oh boy, yes it was. We get an Oskins medal for destroying at least 3 enemy tanks that were 1 tier higher than us. Would you believe it? A steel wall medal for the 1,380 damage that we blocked. The armor on this thing does start to get significant, and trust me, it only gets better from here on. And a high caliber for the 4,700 damage that we dealt. Tank sniper for dealing most of that at long range. And I don't remember firing many, if any, premium rounds this game, and so we would have made a very healthy profit with or without a premium account. And if this had been the standard T-44, this would have still been a very decent profit anyway. With 1,655 base experience points, this was a cracking round to finish off the end of the mid part of the Soviet medium tank tech tree. And so the Soviet medium tanks, I think these are the best vehicles that I would thoroughly recommend to anyone who was just starting World of Tanks. You really can't go wrong with them. They have enough armor to be forgiving that if you get caught out in the open, that you've still got a chance of being able to lick your wounds and get back into safety. They've got enough damage per minute, and they've got good enough gun handling to enable somebody who doesn't have the most precise and their full aims completely locked in yet to still be able to engage their opponents effectively. And while their penetrations aren't the best, they're definitely not some kind of specialist tank that has to really start to learn how high explosive rounds work to be able to penetrate the weak points of the enemy vehicles to really amplify their performance. These tanks are all about just doing the basics right. And if you do the basics right, and these vehicles definitely enable you to do so, then you are going to at least start to ease your way into the game. And as you work your way up the tech tree, obviously things get harder and harder. And so if you're a player who hasn't managed to get above the mid tiers of World of Tanks, when you start to try and push up to tier 7, 8, or even 9 and 10, just really lower your expectations, as things are going to get a lot more tricky. But I really feel that these are the kind of tanks that can ease your way into the higher tiers of World of Tanks. There isn't a map in the game where they can't be useful. There isn't a vehicle that's going to be able to just waltz over them in every situation. They're all rounders. They're great starting vehicles, and they're why these tanks would be my most recommended for any new player when they just start playing World of Tanks. To be the first tech tree I would recommend. And so, ladies and gents, congratulations if you made it to the end of the video. It was a long one today, but hopefully you appreciated that. If you did, give this video a thumbs up, but if you hated it, give it a thumbs down. And if you want to see more content like this, then I thoroughly recommend you come and check out my tech tree showcases every Sunday on twitch.tv/QuickyBaby, starting at 7 o'clock UK time, 8 o'clock European time. I guess if you're East Coast, that's probably going to be about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and if you're in West Coast, it's probably going to be about 9 in the morning. I really strive and I put in as much effort as I possibly can during that window of my streaming sessions. And if you'd like to see more videos like this, aka lengthy highlights come from the Tech Tree showcases to go up onto YouTube, then let me know in the comments and show some support for this video. And hopefully all of you know by now that I'm releasing daily YouTube videos for the rest of the year, and so now's the best time ever to subscribe to the channel and activate notifications so you can get the videos as they are released daily. And let me know in the comments what you think about my recommendation of the Soviet medium tanks for a new player in World of Tanks. Do you think that it's a poor recommendation, or do you think that there's a better line that you would recommend to everyone? And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.